Okay, so here we are back in our little app, and we're going to explore custom data sources. So the easiest way of doing that is just to get cracking straight into the data source. We add our query, and in this instance, once we've given it a name, we will choose custom data source, and straight away you'll see quite a few different options as we go down here. Now, just to put this into context, the custom data source was originally developed to allow developers to access other databases. And by other databases, we're talking about other SQL databases, Access databases, Excel, and so on like that. And we do that through the different database access methods. We can drive the query through a generic OLEDB provider, a generic ODBC driver, and a specific Microsoft SQL Transact SQL driver. And we'll discuss both, all three rather, in a little bit more detail later on. But what this does allow you, therefore, is to be able to integrate to third-party databases, such as I said, Access, SQL, Postgres, anything that you can access through a generic OLEDB or ODBC driver. Now, in addition to that, we've also found, as we've developed our own apps, that it's quite useful to be able to query the Syspro databases as well, or the database tables. It's often quicker to pick up one or two fields from a particular table with a query than it is to power up a business object. And sometimes even there aren't business objects to get the data you actually want. So using a custom data source like this is extremely useful. And we'll see in a short while, it's also possible to do queries on views that you might have set up, and business activity queries, which you may have set up in the SQL database as well. So basically what happens is when you are connecting to a database, you need a connection string. So we're going to be asked for that. A little bit further down, we're going to be asked for the actual SQL statement that we actually want to run, and we'll edit that. And then at this point, we've actually got an option. And basically what we can do is say, well, if the data is coming back from the database, what format do you want it in? Do you want to present it to so that a form can be populated automatically, a list view, a chart, or and the final one is, do you want any formatting at all? And the reason you would want that, for instance, is if you were using Transact SQL and the 4XML or 4XML auto syntax, which means that the results coming from the query is already in XML, you wouldn't want App Designer to be messing around and changing that for you. And then we can test the connections and we can test the SQL statement. So in a nutshell, that's what we're actually going to be doing. So let's have a quick explore. Connection string. Basically, App Designer provides us with a standard Syspro connection string. This one will work nicely with the OLEDB provider. Just as an aside, if you are connecting to other databases and you're not quite sure what the syntax is of a connection string, if you just go to Google and type in SQL connection strings, you'll find numerous sites with examples on. But if we go into here and just have a quick look at the connection string, what we find is it's saying this is the provider I want to use. The data source, well, that's the server name, and we're picking up a variable from App Designer, which is the current Syspro server name. And then the user ID and password is being picked up from the Syspro user ID and password configured inside Syspro. Now, another option for an OLEDB provider is to say to it, I want you to use Windows authentication, in which you can easily do that. So if we have a quick look at some of the examples here, we've provided you with a standard OLEDB one, which is this one. There's an example of an Access one there, both for OLEDB and ODBC. There's Postgres there, ODBC, and Excel. So you can see the power of what the custom database will be doing. So if we just simply choose this one, which is the standard one, and we'll save that in a minute. Down at the bottom here, you can see the variables that you can substitute into this string. Now, obviously, these are just fairly standard ones, but notice also you can get from a variable from the data store and you can pick up a global variable or an app-wide variable. Now, there is a separate course on handling data store variables and global and variables as well. So I think that's about course 8, I think, at the moment. So don't be surprised that these are suddenly popped in, but it gives you complete control of what's in here. And just as an aside, data store variables are encrypted. So if you're worried about readable passwords and user IDs and things, then don't worry. So what we'll do is we'll save that. And then we'll move on to having a look at the SQL statement. To edit our SQL statement that we're going to execute, all we've got to do is simply hit this hyperlink. And this is our editor. So I'll draw your attention first to all the variables that one can insert into a SQL statement. We've got %key%, which would be the primary key, often being passed maybe from a combo box, might be customer in our example. We can pass up to 8 other keys, or on the string %key 1 through to 9, I think. Then we've got a variety of standard system variables. We can pick up information from the data store if we want to. We can pick up information from global variables, which the whole system understands, and app-wide variables. And then we can pick up any field we like from within any form or list view or toolbar and put it into our SQL statement. So fairly, not just fairly flexible, completely flexible, hopefully, that we've got there. Now, on the right-hand side, over here, we've got the available variables. And at any point, if you want any of these, then you just simply double-click them and the field goes into where you want. If we have a look, we'll close that. We have a look at tables. Because the connection string works, we tested it, it's connected to the database, we can see all the tables, in this case in Syspro. So if we pick up the customer table there, so and expand it maybe. So you could, for instance, have something like select, and then you might say, well, I want the name, and then, I don't know, credit limit, salesperson. You get the general idea. And if we wanted to, from, double click that. And if you wanted to test it, there you go, it comes back, and at the moment we've only got it as a form. If you have a query, just as an aside, if you have a query like this that would supposed to be producing more than one record, but your format is set to form, it will only ever display the very first in that list. So in this instance, we would simply go back here, we'll save that, go down here, test the SQL statement, and you see that we're getting row upon row upon row of our list view. So let's nip back into editing the SQL statement and just get rid of that little one there. We've also provided you with the variables tab here. It will actually explain what the value is in each of these ones. So we can see that's my server name, that's my database name, my user ID, company, and so on like that. And that's the current connection string. It's always useful to be able to see the values in these things. And we're also provided you with a series of standard SQL examples here. And this list will no doubt grow as we go along. So if we pick this one as an example, it'll pop in, and this is just giving us a list of stock codes and warehouses and things like that. Now, this does bring me on to a very important point. If the SQL statement doesn't work in Microsoft SQL or Access or wherever it is not going to work in the application designer. So my technique that I tend to do is, if I'm struggling to build a query, is I go to the database management studio and build the query in the tools there, hard coding any variables that I think are I need to make it work, and get the syntax correct. Then I cut and paste it, and pop it in here, and then substitute the hard-coded variables with, or the values with variables that I'm going to do. At least then I've got confidence that syntax is going to work. And at any stage, you should test your SQL statement here. So because we've got %key % here, it's asking us to enter the key values. I've keyed in B100 earlier, so we'll do that. And now we can see there's our warehouse and our quantity on hand, months to date sold, and so on like that, just as the query had. So what we'll do now is we will save that and come out, and we'll try and use a custom data source in our little application that we've got. It struck me as we've developing our little app that all we have done really is made a little bit of a cut down version of the standard customer inquiry program. But it would be quite useful if, on loading this app, I got a list view of the top 10 customers who owed us the most money. And a good way of doing that would be through some sort of custom data source. So let's go and have a look at actually how we start to do that. We'll go into data sources again. We will add our custom data source, so top 10 customers. Oops, not going to work. Customers. Okay, what we're going to do now is choose custom data source. We can use our Syspro connection. I just double click there actually. It's just a bit of a shortcut to bring that up quite quickly. And we know that connection string will work. We actually do want, we will want to click execute when the key is blank, because we'll see shortly that in fact though there is no key, we just simply want a generic query to go down the customer master looking for things, not just not a particular customer. So we'll need to check that. If we don't, then what will happen? App designer will say, well, I'm expecting to be passed a key, so I'm going to sit here and wait until I get one. And with that checked, it's going to move on. We'll want a list view because we're going to have more than one customer coming up, probably. So that's the format we want. And then we want our SQL statement. So we'll nip into here. And here we are in our editor, which is great. Now, as luck would have it, there is actually a sample for the top 10 customers. And if we click that, this is a query that will give us the top 10 customers by descending balance. But the people who owe us the most money might not be as in a balance, might not be the people who actually are over their credit limit by the most. And those really are the people we need to be targeting. So we need to do some sort of arithmetic to add another column. At the end of our list here, what we will do is we'll put a comma in there to extend it. And in the best fashion that you can see, I've actually already got an item here. We'll pop it in here. So basically what I'm saying here is that I'm taking the customer credit limit and I'm subtracting from it the current balance plus the outstanding order value, and then calculating an available credit, which is fine. And then what we want at the moment, this order by statement is descending balance. So what we want is we want to do that and get rid of that. It's fine. And because we want the highest numbers or the lowest numbers first, I should say the minus numbers, we want them ascending. So that's looking good. And we can test our SQL statement here. And even better in that we haven't had any errors. And you can see now that we're getting multiple rows. And here's our available credit. Starts at some colossal number of -3 something. Then we're going -8, -7. So you can see that the sequence is actually correct. So that's looking pretty good for us at the moment. So we will save that, and we will save the data source. And now all we've got to do is start to connect that up to our list view and so on like that. So the first thing we need to do is actually add our list view. So there we go. And we might as well move it into position, I think on the top here. And we want to change the name to something like top 10 customers. Something like that, that'll do. Now what we need to do now is to bind our list view to our data source. So we come down here, bind data. So we will simply say we actually want to use a custom data source here. Select the data source that we're looking for, top 10 customers, which is actually what we want, which is good. And now we want to add the columns. Now what's actually happening, app designers queried the database using our query and come back with the columns that we've actually selected. So we choose them. We probably want the customer name, credit limit, maybe the salesperson, telephone, and no available, something like that. That'll do. Add those. There they are. Might make sense if we put the available credit here, possibly current balance next to it. Maybe put it there. Okay, that's looking okay. Now, we've, just as we did with the list view down here, we've obviously added our columns, we've bound our data. We just need to tell it when to actually execute the data source. So we come down here, and basically where we're saying is refresh the list view on event. Now, beforehand we chose toolbar, but in this instance, we actually wanted to fire the data source on initialization. So as the app loads, it will do the query, populate the list view, and away we go. And that's why in the data source, we actually chose to say execute if the key is blank. So let's go and have a look at that working. Okay, so our app has popped up. There are our original panes, and this is our top 10 list now. So we can see it's in worked out the available credit, and we've now got the descending balance or calculation of the available credit, which is exactly what we want to do. Now, I guess one could sort of look down here and then key in the customer number 14, and it would all work as before. But the ideal, I suppose, would be to be able to click on one of these and it automatically do a query and populate the forms, list views, and so on like that. So I think that's what we'll do next. So straight to our VB script. So we go to our editor. And this is our sum total of VB script that we've got so far. We will need an on-user event because we're trapping something that's happening on the UI. As it happens, we've got a little bit of a sample bit of code. We'll just take that out because I've actually got some code over here that we can copy in and paste in there, along with some constants for readability in here. So let me just take you through the code. Basically, I've defined some constants which are the name of the list views or the ID of the list views and the event ID of the toolbar customers. This is simply for readability. Otherwise, you've got these bits spread around your code. So as you can see here, for instance, what I'm saying is here, list view refresh, bind data, invoices list view with a customer number. So it just reads. Otherwise, I'd have to put DTQ007L0, which whilst I'm doing remembering and coding it, I'll remember it, but then somebody might follow on behind and think, what on earth has he been up to? So this is actually quite a good process. But basically what's happening here, if you cast your mind back to previous courses, it's a user event. So there's an event that's happening on the UI. It's a list view event. I'm looking for the event that happens on this list view. So I'm looking for an event name. There's my variable, top 10 list view, that's the name. If the event name is that, then I want you to check the event ID. And if the event raised is you've clicked on a row, then I want you to do something. And what you'll find is when you click on a row, param1 has all the data, and you can find this information out over on the events over here. And if we go down to list row selected here, it explains to you that you will get a tab delimited field of the data that's of the whole row. So in effect, what we do is we split it on the tab, comes into a data array. Data arrays always start at displacement 0. So the customer number is the first column in the list view, and therefore that's how we pick it up. Now, just as an aside, and remember that we've had covered this on previous courses, if you have moved the columns around after you've actually added them, they still remember the order in which they were added. So customer number was the first one, it will always remain the first one. So then we basically call a data source refresh on both those data sources, passing it the key of customer number. They will fire, they will refresh the form for us. We do the same for the list view for the invoices, and then we bang the customer number up into the combo on the toolbar to make it all square. So let's go and have a quick look at that running. We press our run button. That's looking good. So there we go. And if we click on one of these, so there you see what's actually happened. It's fired the events and popped it up in there. So that's exactly what we want. But having looked at this app, it looks fairly bland. And really what we want to be doing is attracting the operator's eye to anything that's negative. So it would be quite useful if we were able to change the color maybe of these negative items so that an operator would say, wow, I've got to deal with that. So let's go and see how we do that next. So to do this, what we're going to have to do is disconnect the data source from the list view and do some VB scripting so that we can manipulate the XML and inject into the XML characteristics for the available credit column. So we'll go to the list view first. Let's collapse that and go to binding. And just here where it says refresh list view on event, we've got it on initialization. What we're going to do is going to say we don't want it to be automatically done by the list view. Okay, and now we'll nip to the VB script. Right, first things first is we're going to have to do some stuff on initialization. We haven't got the event, so we go up here to events, we'll add on initialization. I'm going to delete that and move it to the top of my code here. This is just simply my style of writing, and I found it works very well. I like to put all the events at the front in the order that they will be executing because it makes logical sense. And I'm really writing for people following on from behind me. And then any other function that I write that supports these events, I put below in a section called supporting functions. And in that way, people following on at least get an idea of the structure of actually what we're writing. So what we'll do there is in here, let's just put a note here, show top 10 customers. So the first thing we want to be able to do is run the data source ourselves. So what we're trying to do here is get hold of the XML. So we'll go to a data source call out, and we want a data source execute, and it's the top 10. Okay, now this one doesn't have a key. Remember that we checked that option, run if you don't have a key. So we'll remove the keys from there. That's done that. So the XML now will come into the return value. I have created a function, which we'll see in a short while, and I'm just copying a bit of code here, called create top 10 list view. I'll take you through that in a short while, but basically I'm taking the output from our data source and passing it into this function, and it's going to be doing something for us. And then finally, what we want to do is make sure that the pane, the docking pane, shows in case, for instance, you've parked it and you need it to open again. So what we'll do is we'll do that, and we will add that. Now, once again, it's just popped the name of the internal name of the list view. I'm going to pick this up here and replace that. And it starts to make at least readable sense of actually what's going on. So what we're doing on initialization, we're firing up the data source, getting the result, passing it into our function. Let's go and have a look at our function. I'll get rid of these here. So our supporting function here called create top 10 list view, taking our XML in, first thing it does is load it into a DOM, which is fine, all bog standard stuff. We've done this before. We are setting the selection language to XPath. Those of you who aren't familiar with XPath, there is a sample app called SAM XML. And if you look at that, there's all sorts of examples. It's very, very powerful, far more powerful than just a normal querying of an XML document. We're building up some variables, header and footer. Then what I'm asking is please pick up all the row elements from the XML coming from data source, start to build up each row. What I'm specifically looking for is a node called available credit, which is the one we actually want. Because XML is always a text string, we need to pick up the element name and convert it to a double, because we're going to be doing some arithmetic on it. And the arithmetic we're doing on it is, are we checking if it's less than 0 or not? If it's less than 0, we build one style of element, and you can see me adding foreground and background colors in here. And if it's 0 or greater, then it just bobs out the element name and it does the normal work, and it just loops around all the rows looking at that. So very, very straightforward. And then finally, we create a final XML string. We add the header, the XML that we've been building in this loop, and the footer. And then we basically populate the list view by chucking this string at the top 10 list view. And this call out says, please clear all previous records and add this XML. And it's as simple as that. The only thing that I need to show you is this bit here. Now, how on earth are you going to find out what all these bits and pieces are? Well, actually, it's relatively straightforward. I'm just going to come a little bit further down here to show you. It's actually in this tab here, field properties. If you can't find the field properties, it's in the view field properties there. And if you wanted to, I don't know, make it orange and the foreground yellow, and you wanted well, you can see all the other bits and pieces. Once you've actually set them, if you say insert VB script, it'll generate what it expects these fields to be for you. Obviously, you can set them to different colors. I mean, if it was a red, then you just change that to red, as you see here. And then all you've got to do is, having created a sample, mimic it in your own code. Very, very straightforward there. Okay, so with a bit of luck and fair wind, we'll just do a quick syntax check. It should actually run. So let's go and have a go at that. So let's just run our app and see what happens. It's looking pretty good. It's what we wanted. It's gone red. All the negative numbers are red, 0 and the positives are not. So we just have to click on, say, customer 1, and hey presto, there we go. So it just gives you an idea of what you can do, and also as you're developing apps, trying to create something which will aid people doing a job, like adding the bright red or highlighting bits and pieces. So I hope that's given you a good idea of how to use data sources. And if you look at the back at the type of VB script that we've written, it's minimal compared to actually what's going on. I'm really quite impressed with it, really. So next step is to go and discuss a little bit more about data sources in general. Thanks very much. The custom data sources that we've been using to date have been using the OLE DB generic provider. And that works well with 99.9% of connections to databases. But if you're in a position where you need to use the Transact SQL syntax specifically, such as using things like the for XML syntax on queries, then the OLE DB standard generic provider doesn't support that syntax. So we have a third option within our access method. So let me just have a look in here and show you what I mean. we will just put something like transact SQL test in there. We'll select our custom data source, and it's this item here, data access method. And if we select the transact SQL item there, what it'll do is it binds to a driver specifically that supports the transact SQL syntax. Connection string will double click. And those of you who are observant or know a bit about the connection strings may well say, well, hang on a minute, that standard connection string says it's using an OLE DB provider. As it happens, to make things simpler, App Designer, if it detects Transact SQL and then finds a provider with Microsoft OLE DB in it, will remove it. So it's actually using the connection string from data source onwards. If you're uncomfortable with that, then you just add your own connection string and put the variables in that you need to make it work. But that's how App Designer as standard works. And the sample I want to show you is going to be pulling back its own XML, so we're not going to format it for any App Designer forms, lists, or charts. Okay, so let's go and edit our SQL statement. Okay, here we go. And what I'm going to do is just pull out one of the SQL examples. We've got a couple here, one with for XML auto in here. So this is exactly the same as the query that we used earlier on, showing you about stock codes and warehouses. Transact SQL has a for XML syntax, which means that the query will return XML for you, and the auto means just simply automatically generate it. If you study this for XML, you'll see that you've got total control over the format of the XML coming back. But in this instance, I'm just saying, get on with it. And if we just test this now, we've got a %key % in there, so it's asking for a stock code. It'll come straight back with the XML straight from the SQL database. So there'll be no App Designer processing in this at all. So you can see that because it's from env master, it's put env master as the root element. The where clause has become an attribute to that element, and then the rows that it would normally have returned in a SQL query are now rows or elements with attributes in the element. So that's one example there. And just to show you a little bit of another example, I think we've got one here. And this has got elements. So what this will do is actually run same as auto, but instead of using attributes, it converts those attributes to elements. So if we test it again, and you see it's a little bit easier to maybe interrogate with elements rather than attributes. And there's all sorts of things you can do. You can override the root elements. You can change the elements for each of these. You can flatten them and all sorts of things. So just be aware. Also with Transact SQL, you may well want to run stored procedures and pass parameters in it. And a little bit later on, we'll look at transaction data sources. You may well want to create and update tables. You may well want to create and update stored procedures and so on, and you will need Transact SQL for that. So that's just a quick blast through why we've put that in. So that's the end of our query data source. The next section will be transaction data sources.